Hi, I'm here with Chris Duyvelshoff, and he's our horticultural specialist, and we're just having a conversation about nutrient management planning for orchard crops, in particular apples. So Chris, we were doing some chatting and talking about the difference between, looking at nutrient management planning for a crop like apples, because it's more of a perennial crop in comparison to annual. So what would you say are kind of the key points that you would advise people on?
Yeah, first of all, number one, the most important thing is pre-plant land preparation is critical in these crops like apples and grapes, where you only get one shot at it every 20, 30 years. So you want to make sure that you do your soil tests ahead of time and correct things like pH and potassium, which are difficult to correct after the fact.
Right.
So that's number one critical thing. Number two is the influence of the amount of nutrient you add per growing season depends on the stage of the crop's development, whether it's like a first year planting or a mature planting.
So smaller trees basically need less.
Exactly. So, there are different rates to use per area based on the age of the planting.
Okay.
And the third thing is for mature plantings, you don't necessarily need to add the same content of, say, nitrogen or potassium every year in these crops. Because they're perennial crops with a large root system, long-term mycorrhizal relationships.
They've got a lot of room to explore.
They've got a lot of room to explore, and they also have the ability to retain nutrients in the tissues, like in the trunk tissues between seasons. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so nutrient recommendations for mature plantings of perennial crops should be based on a tissue test.
Okay, so you're relying quite heavily. And are you tissue testing every year? Is
Yes.
that ideal? Yeah.
Yes. In orchard management, all the blocks are tissue tested every year. And based on where your percent nitrogen, potassium, zinc, etc. Fall, you can adjust your fertilizer rates based on those percentages.
Okay, great. And we chatted a little bit too about foliar application. So in some cases you can adjust fertility with foliar rather than applying to soil?
Yeah, and with foliar fertilization, we're not really trying to do it for our main macronutrients. In some cases, growers will apply a nitrogen spray in apples after bloom, because that's a very low period in nitrogen status in the tree. But in general, foliar fertilization in apples is reserved for boron, which is around pink to early bloom, zinc, which is done usually at bud break, a little after bud break, and calcium. And calcium is to improve fruit quality at the end of the season.
Okay, so it sounds like it's important to know the stage of the plant development, very much so, over the course of many years, but also within that growing season, and knowing the stage of the plant and when it might be appropriate to apply some of these nutrients.
Absolutely, yeah, it's critical, And, applying a nutrient at the wrong time isn't going to do anything for you, as you know. So,
good point, great. Well, thanks very much, Chris. That's a few tips on orchard management for nutrient management plan, and a few things to keep in mind. And I think we chatted earlier, one of the points that I think is interesting in nutrient management when you're following the recommendations, kind of suggested it's both a bit of an art and a science, I think, for a lot of these perennial crops. Would you say that's true for apples?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of it comes down to experience and, experience on your farm, and what, your friend down the road might be doing may not be applicable to you, because we have a lot of very variable soil types.
We sure do.
In the area.
We sure do. Well, that's great. Thanks so much, Chris, and hopefully that'll give you a bit of a start on your nutrient management planning for orchards.
Thanks, Amy. You're welcome.